Welcome, 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 everyone. You're back for another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. This is episode 9. With us today, I'm your host, Ryan. We've also got Mark returning. How you doing, Mark?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me. It's been a while.
Yes, we're very happy to have you on this very fun episode we're going to be doing. Ed's with us
Yes.
also again today. How you doing, Ed?
I'm great. I'm really excited for this topic today.
Nice. And Paul returns as well. This is kind of like an offshoot of that last episode we did, Paul, and the Ninja Turtles, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I'm fired up for it. I think it's going to be a good one.
Okay. So, what we've decided to discuss today is talk about video game adaptations, more specifically like movies and TV series, but there's been a bunch of new projects coming out in the news, and there's been a long storied history about video games getting adapted into other mediums. So we figured we'd talk about some of our favorites and like what our dream project would be and how we'd handle it, or just like our favorite aspects of when things go right and when things go wrong, and just thoughts about that, just to have some fun today. So, Mark, since you haven't been on in a while, I figure we'll toss to you. And so, what's some of your favorite video game adaptations that you've managed to come across?
I would definitely say number one is Wreck-It Ralph, and I'm hoping everybody else has that on their list. It's such a cute, family-friendly sort of series. Both the first one and Ralph Breaks the Internet. I think they were both classic. And it's a little bit of a stretch as far as is it actually based off of a video game? It has a ton of video game ties into it, but I would say that's likely my number one. There's a deeper list that I've got for sure, but I just enjoy seeing all the different adaptations and all the other characters all coming to life. I thought it was done very, very well.
Right, and I agree with you on Wreck-It Ralph. That's more of a original story inspired by the history of video games, as
Sure.
Wreck-It Ralph's own game is strongly influenced by, or strongly inspired by, the original Mario and Donkey Kong game, or Donkey
Exactly.
Kong arcade game.
Yeah, Donkey Kong.
And of course, there was plenty of cameos from other characters in there. It was talking more about the history of arcade games. Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, is more internet culture, but they did talk about like online games. So yes, I agree with you that that's a lot of fun. Was there any specifically pieces of work from existing video games that you've come across that you've either enjoyed or hated in the last couple of years?
Yeah, in the last couple of years, it's going to be a little bit more than a couple of years. I think my
Go as
probably
far back
all-time
as you want.
favorite. Yeah, well, some of that. Well, let me give you a little bit of a list
Hmm.
here. Mortal Kombat is definitely up there.
Oh
Super
yeah.
Mario Brothers is absolutely a classic, but
Hmm.
Hitman I feel like is my most underrated. That kind of falls under the cracks that maybe isn't going to be on a lot of other people's lists that
Oh
we're
yeah.
talking about.
There's like 2 or 3 Hitman movies, right?
The one that I'm thinking of is from 2007. I think they've talked about remaking them. It was just something I saw in college with all of my roommates, and definitely was playing Hitman at the time. And I know this is actually a topic that we talked about. I think the last time I was on the episode too, with the new Hitman coming out, but very, very relevant, I guess, in that sense. But just it was very different, and I would say overall, I'm sure we'll get to this. Video games generally, or video game movies generally, get very, very poor ratings or praise.
Yeah.
But I feel like overall, it had a strong story. It had great ties. It's also a video game that very much, it's an action based game. It just works. Whereas the others, Super Mario Brothers and Mortal Kombat, sure, you can get some fighting scenes, and Super Mario Brothers is just, it's so unique. I don't even want to get into that right now because I'm
Yeah.
sure we will. But yeah, Hitman I thought was very spot on.
Yes, and there were 2 of them. There are 2 movies based off the Hitman game series, not to be confused with all the other movies that are about hitmen. So
Right.
just clarifying that for our audience that may be
Thank you.
wondering. Now, speaking back to your Microsoft background, Halo project has been kicked around for forever. Is that something you ever had hype for, or as you've said before, are you more hoping that Halo will kind of take a back seat and you'll get yourself a Gears of War project someday?
Well, that's actually the more hopeful thing. So I have Gears of War as my. I would love to see a Gears of War movie. It has been in discussion since actually also 2007. I hate to keep throwing that year out. But as of last summer, it was most recently confirmed. It is still on. It's changed hands a couple of times, obviously, with such a long stretch there from the initial couple of games that had come out in early 2000s. But yeah, as far as a Halo game comes out, because I know that was your original question, I would be all ears. I know there has been the live action. They've also done, I think it was that Nightfall kind of tie-in between, was it 3 and 4 or 4 and 5? I think it was 3. I can't even remember. That just shows my memory. I thought it was good. It was more of a, I think it was actually more of a episode that they kind of put all together, right?
I am
I recall.
thinking of the. I'm more intimately familiar with the Halo animated collection they put out.
Okay.
There was Halo Nightfall, which was live action,
Yeah.
and then Halo Media. I'm trying to Google some stuff right now. So
Yeah, and Nightfall, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't really Halo of what it could have been. I mean, in all
right,
honesty, I think the Warthog was like the best part about all of it, but like,
yeah,
they put Warthog in Forza and it's like, all right, cool. Like they could have done a little bit more is what I'm getting at there.
right. I'm thinking more of Halo Legends, which was a collection of different stories within the Halo universe, and that seems to be very well regarded. And a lot of this is kind of a pattern. A lot of the animated stuff ends up being much more faithful to the properties they come from, and it's a little sad, but that we don't see more high budget animation. But yeah, Halo Legends was a complete project that was well regarded, and the
But
live action stuff is always seems to have more difficulty.
I think an important detail too that you kind of were pointing out is just the licensing. I think that's always hindered so many of these movies, is just, just to get that upfront, just have these characters, these names in this film already is costing, an exorbitant amount of money that I only wish, right?
Yeah, yeah. At the same time, I remember hearing about multiple developments in the Halo live action projects. I don't know if it was directly leading up to Nightfall or if it's just other projects because they've been trying to do either a series or a movie for a while. But I remember reading in various coverage, IGN and other news outlets, that there was creative differences with that are notorious. Hollywood and their directors and writers want to take control of the product and really put their own spin on it, whereas Microsoft was really fighting to have direct creative control. They brought their Halo Bible to the table and said like, "Hey, we really want to build something off of this," and they just couldn't reach an agreement, which is also sad because ultimately that reason's petty, and I would blame Hollywood more on that for not just creating something that was along these lines and would definitely resonate with fans and would reach a new audience and would probably make a lot of money, but that is the industry, as you were so rightly pointing out.
Yeah. So the other part, I know I kind of we were splitting Halo and Gears of War, but Gears of War, that was sort of the number one film that I would love. I think it also could be done very, very well. It's shot in, or at least the game is all third person. So, that's always been one
Yeah.
discussion, is do you keep a first person shooter such as Doom? They made that movie back in
Oh
2005,
yeah, I did see
which
that
was
in
first
theaters.
person. Did you?
Yeah.
I think I might have actually as well. But yeah, as far as the third person goes, I think that very much, or very easy to do when it comes to film. And Gears of War, it's also got that close cover base, so it's not like Call of Duty where everybody's just running across the sides of buildings and then jumping and running like crazy. It is a little bit fast, but it's in your face, it's gritty, it's cover base, it's bloody. Like that's the type of action that I want to see.
I think you could tell a really good war story about that, and it just has a very interesting sci-fi twist. So we'll also come back to that and see if that is your dream project, and we can go a little more in depth. But I want to cycle over to Ed and ask Ed. So, what's some of your favorite adaptations that you've read or seen?
So I don't necessarily consider myself a fan of video game movies. I mean, there actually haven't been a lot of movies in my favorite properties, but I if I hear something is good, I'm pretty much down to watch it, even if I don't have a lot of history of the series. One of the reasons I recently watched that fits that bill is the Castlevania series on Netflix. I mean, I'm a big fan of, I guess you would call it adult animation. I like animation that is aimed towards people my age, and that definitely fits the bill. And the story and characterization, that it started out good, decent in the first season, but especially as it came into the third season, it's really hit its stride. I'm really happy to see that they are making another season, although I don't know when that's going to happen. But I feel lucky just to know that they're making a fourth season, because a lot of Netflix series don't make it that far. But to anyone who's a fan of good animation, or I guess anime, that would really be one that I would recommend. I think you said you saw that, Ryan, right?
Yes, I am all caught up on the 3 seasons, and I am in complete agreement with you that it is amazing, and it's probably one of the most fitting and well done adaptations since the original Mortal Kombat movie. Now, I also feel that the original Resident Evil movie the first live action one was actually pretty decent. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn good for the time. But if I had to look and compare to everything we've had so far, and if you do a wiki dive on like all the different video game adaptations, minus some of the smaller like animated features that we saw online from like anime stuff and other little promotional tie-in videos, that Castlevania is like a full-fledged Western series. That's so amazing, and it doesn't necessarily retell any of the stories, any specific stories from the games. It's just kind of inspired in that world. But then, yeah, I would say like that's probably the best video game adaptation thing in terms of TV or movie series so far.
Do you have any history with the Castlevania series? Because I'm trying to think what I've played. I think the first one I ever played, and I didn't finish it because I think it was too hard for me as a kid, was the Circle of the Moon on the Game Boy Advance. I think I've dabbled with maybe some of the DS ones, but I haven't really played that many Castlevania games, let alone to completion. But it does have a very appealing theme and a good amount of lore. So it I can't really say whether it's a faithful adaptation, but I guess like you said, it's more inspired than a direct adaptation.
I've only dabbled as well, but I've heard a lot about Castlevania over the years thanks to the amount of podcasts and videos I've watched. My first real experience with the formula, I think I might have dabbled with Symphony of the Night. Trying to think, and I was interested when they were rebooting it for Xbox 360 and PS3 with the brand new like 3D action ones. And apparently the
You mean
first one
Lords
was,
of Shadow?
yeah, Lords of Shadow, which I was excited for because I'm like, oh, if they fully develop it like a 3D game, and we've seen good examples of this, like the new God of War is kind of built like a Metroidvania. Dark Souls is very Metroidvania-esque, and if you just take that kind of level structure and then apply the code of paint of Castlevania, you kind of get that. But I didn't really play through all of those. The closest I've gotten to playing a pure Castlevania experience was actually the new Bloodstained game that came from the creator of Castlevania, Iga, who took to Kickstarter and is separated from Konami in order to make it. So I played through and beat that, and that was a very pure Castlevania experience from what I've been told, and I enjoyed that a lot. And since then, I've played Metroidvania, quote unquote, style games, or labyrinth games, as I'm trying to push is the new term for them. So that yeah, that's my experience. But I'm well versed in the story and like the characters. So like I knew who the Belmonts were, I knew who Alucard was and what was going on and what Dracula's typical motive is. So all of that like made sense to me, and that's why I was saying like from what I know, it's not from people who know better than me, it's not directly adapting any of the stories. It's just kind of taking on a new one. Because I believe the Belmont, I forget his first name. He's a new Belmont.
Yeah, what? Yeah, I forget his name too. Trevor Belmont is what it
Trevor.
is.
Yep.
Trevor, yeah. And I think, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about the Castlevania series, but I think that's kind of what makes it a good adaptation is it's not just a good video game series, it's a good series period. And I think that for any genre type or specific film or TV series to be considered good, I think it's got to have something beyond just its thematic elements. I mean, I always think that about science fiction. Like you can have science fiction that's okay, but something that really elevates itself above the genre is really where it becomes an exceptional experience for me. But other than Castlevania, the only really ones two that I can think of other than that are Sonic the Hedgehog from early this year, which I can't say that probably was not a faithful adaptation from the games, but I thought it was lighthearted. I liked the performance of the actors. Jim Carrey is always funny in those types of roles. He's got a really good personality in the way he acts, and I mean it was obviously a commercial success, which that's not everything, but I liked that something from video games kind of reaches a broader audience, because I think it's always good for a medium that I like to appeal to more people. I mean, I think it's only good for more people to become interested in video games. I know you had your issues with that.
Yeah, and I can explain briefly what my perspective is coming from this as a video game and Sonic the Hedgehog fan, more specifically. And it's not that I think it's a bad movie. I don't think the Sonic the Hedgehog movie that came out is bad. It just feels very generic, like it's mystical animal makes human friend story, and they just put the Sonic the Hedgehog character in it. But you could have had any of the other mystical animal, and it would have made been pretty much the exact same movie. Now they did put in a lot of cool little references and Easter eggs and things from the pop culture that are there. My main issue is that it's just not what I wanted. I would have preferred it to be a full CG movie with more directly referencing the universes of the games and having that. They already have the successful Sonic Boom cartoon that's full CG. They've had the anime Sonic X. So it's not like there hasn't been good adaptations doing that. It's just always more fulfilling to see it get that Hollywood treatment and have that faith of like an animated character should be in an animated movie. So that's my principal complaint, but as a whole, no, I don't think it's bad. And I think you made an excellent point there, Ed, that it does broaden the audience, and there's probably a bunch of people who might either know who Sonic is or have never seen it before and may now start buying Sonic games for themselves or their children.
Yeah, it certainly is a case of the kind of movie where it doesn't succeed. It maybe could have succeeded without the property, but having a licensed property really drives its popularity. Now, I'm not as opposed to having animated characters mixed with live action as you are.
It could
This
work in
is
some scenarios. I just thought for like Sonic specifically, I have that complaint more specifically about Sonic for that instance. But yeah, I'm also a fan of like I think superhero movies should be animated more often than live action, but that's a whole other thing.
it can work. I mean, this is really kind of a deep cut, but I don't know if you've ever seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh
But
yeah, exactly. Like that in Space
I
Jam.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, animation with live action can really be something special, but I will agree that Sonic is probably not an example of that, even though I really did enjoy it. The other one that I can think of that I found pretty enjoyable was Detective Pikachu. And
Yes.
again, I'm not a huge Pokemon fan. I played the games when I was younger. I think I stopped pretty much after the Game Boy Advance games. I don't even think I had a DS one. I think the last I played was maybe Ruby and Sapphire, and I did enjoy those as a kid. But I'm not one of those diehard Pokemon fans my age, of which it's very popular. But I do think that one was a fun movie, and it succeeded just as a movie as by itself. And
So
it even if you're not a huge fan of Pokemon, you could get some of the nods, the references, and it does have a strong cast. At least it had 1 star, and it kind of like how I thought Jim Carrey was a strong point of Sonic the Hedgehog.
right.
Ryan Reynolds really added a lot to Detective Pikachu.
Once again, great. And the funny thing is, it's almost the reverse there. For I guess the same thing can be said for uh, for Sonic as well, considering all the other adaptations, but they weren't like big movies. But Pokemon, I didn't feel as jilted when they did the live action because there had already been 3 theatrical animated movies, maybe a fourth. I forget if the fourth movie ended up, but they had a huge deal when Pokemon brought up, and if no one else brought that up, I was going to bring up Pokemon as one of the biggest animated video game adaptations there is. So yeah, I agree with you, Detective Pikachu. And it was so funny because when I first heard they were going to do a live action Pokemon, I'm like, no, don't do that. It works so well animated and it's just going to look really weird or really bad. And I was super impressed as the trailers came out. And I was convinced. I'm like, okay, I'm in. This is really cool. And when I watched it, I had a similar reaction. I thought it was just extremely well done. And I think it does really good as just being a new kind of movie in a mystical universe. And then if you understand what Pokemon is, it just enhances it. So yeah, I agree with your points on that too.
There was
The
also a
effects
movie.
were really good. I thought they did a great job really bringing the Pokemon into a 3D design that integrates well with the real world. I mean, I feel like if Pokemon were real and they were walking around among us, that they got it pretty close to what they would look like.
I'll throw to Mark in just a second. Yes, although some of them, I think they went a little too detailed, so some of them are borderline nightmare fuel. Which if you actually dig into like the Pokemon lore deep down in the literal translations, or not translations, but the literal meanings in like some of the Pokedex entries, some of the Pokemon are actually nightmare fuel. So that does make a lot of sense. And I think I would have probably asked them to go a little more towards the cartoony, especially since they do all those commercials for Pokemon Go where it's like the more traditionally animated CG Pokemon next to humans. And I think people in general probably respond to that just as well, as long as the interactions look convincing. So that's there, but I agree overall that like they really did interpret them well. Like they made Pikachu look cute. That's what they had to do. So Mark, what did you want to add?
Yeah, well, going back to Sonic real quick, I realized I had
Go
written
right
this
ahead.
down earlier. Just a quick props to that movie and how long they kind of delayed everything. And then, I don't think it got 5 stars out of 5 from everyone, but I think it had great success even after its delayed entry into the theaters. So I just want to say that real quick. And then one other detail too with Detective Pikachu. I haven't seen it yet myself, but didn't realize. But actually, it's pretty much number 2 in terms of. I'm looking at Wikipedia's got a great little breakdown as far as all the movies that have, or all the video games that have become movies, and breaking it down, looking specifically at live action Hollywood movies, actually netting only behind Warcraft in terms of worldwide profits. And since it only came out about a year ago and a little more, it's likely going to catch up to Warcraft, at least, eventually.
Detective Pikachu or Sonic?
Detective Pikachu.
Okay, because that's one thing that actually surprised me early on, and it sounds like it changed, is that Sonic was outselling Detective Pikachu as a movie, like in terms of raw box office numbers, and I was super shocked. Now I realize that Sonic's been around longer, but Pokemon is so much bigger. I was really surprised
Yeah,
that Pikachu isn't. Honestly, I'm surprised it's not bigger than Warcraft at this point because it's Pokemon, and you'd figure everyone with their mom, their child, and their grandma would have gone like 3 times because it's
true.
Pokemon. But I think it also had like a weird timing around that, so that might have been part of it.
Do you want me to give you the top 5 real quick as far as the top 5 grossing video game movies?
Yeah, go right ahead.
All right, Warcraft I'm going to round
Sure,
up and
sure.
down. Warcraft $440 million, Detective Pikachu 433, Rampage 428
Oh
million,
my
Prince
God, I
of
forgot about
Persia
that.
336 million, and then Resident Evil at 312, and then Sonic is right at the cusp at number 6 spot at
Now,
308.
when it says Resident Evil, is that like the series or does that?
Sorry, final chapter.
Oh, geez, wow. Uh, okay, that's
Mark, I do want to. Oh, sorry, Ryan.
go
I
right
just
ahead.
want to jump in real quick before we get to another topic. I wanted to jump in to your point about the delays for Sonic.
Yeah,
I think it is worth noting. I mean, that it's pretty cool that they did delay it to get it right, and not that it was perfect, but they. If you remember, they got. I think we had talked about it a couple times when we hung out at that time. They got a huge amount of backlash from fans because of how bad that initial Sonic design looked.
right.
So I think it
Still haunts
was
my dreams.
Impressively
right.
terrible.
So I think it was cool. I mean, sometimes you see like because I think I have the feeling either way it probably would have made money because it was a Sonic movie. It had the Sonic name, so it's pretty easy for like a corporate movie studio or company to be like, well, we already spent all this time and money on the initial design. We're probably gonna have good box office numbers either way. We're just gonna ignore the fans and do what we want. So I think it was pretty cool that they decided to listen to the fans and delay it and probably cost, even though maybe they did make a little bit more money back from the box office, they probably cost themselves more by the redesign and the delays. So I think
Absolutely.
it's nice and worth noting that they did take a lot of extra time to make sure that it was right, because that second design was certainly much better than the than that original disaster. So
And I think
anyway, sorry, I just want to jump in before we got onto another
I was
topic.
going to say, I think that's something that's a risk in terms of that investment that Sega is absolutely, they don't want to tarnish that image that could potentially, hinder game sales for the next decade if something like that goes out the door and it just doesn't match what the fans were looking for.
Oh,
Mhm.
Sonic's game sales are completely their own fault. That movie would not have done much.
Yes.
If anything, the movie could have only hurt it. Could only have helped it. Excuse me.
Right.
It's Freudian slip there. The
Mhm.
yeah, the redesign as a Sonic fan, that was absolutely necessary and probably is the main reason that the movie got way more positive reception and people went to go see it because, oh, good, they fixed it, and that's amazing. And it's probably made more money than we think it has due to the fact that they did green light the sequel, and it's in production right now.
Cool.
So, quickly tossing back to Ed, were there any other video game adaptations you wanted to quickly point out as faves or absolute hated?
Honestly, I haven't seen that many. I know, so, you mentioned some big ones. I didn't see Warcraft. I didn't see Rampage. Haven't seen any of the Resident Evil movies or Tomb Raider. I guess there haven't really been that many that I've been interested. And the three that I mentioned, I've only seen because I thought they would actually be good movies. And maybe one day they'll make something based on some of my favorite series, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Yes, we will
But I'm
certainly.
not a huge connoisseur of video game movies. But maybe I should be. Maybe there's some gaps in my viewing history that I need to go back and fill.
Well, that's part of what the conversation's here for. Is maybe you'll hear some of the stuff we talk about and you'll want to check it out. But if not, that's also fine as well. We all choose to spend our time having fun in whatever way we can without hurting people, so that's fine. So we're gonna move on to Paul. Why don't you tell us about what you've been exposed to in terms of video game adaptations and some of your favorites?
All right. Well, I'm kind of similar to Ed, where I haven't seen a whole lot, compared to how I think I'm probably the same way, whereas they just haven't made a lot of movies or TV shows based on video games that I like to play. So I haven't seen a lot, but first I'll start off with one that I didn't like. I was really disappointed with the Resident Evil series, the movie series. And we'll probably get more into this whenever we do our Resident Evil specific podcast. But
Mhm.
like you mentioned when you were talking, it's not the first movie, at least, it's not a bad movie. And I guess the overall theme of it isn't necessarily unfaithful to Resident Evil. But my biggest problem with it is that the main character of the entire movie series is not a character in the Resident Evil games. Like Alice, that character they created, like
Yeah.
she's not in a Resident Evil video game. Like, why did you make a video game based movie off like entirely around this character who's not in a video game? So that bothered me. Also, the first movie didn't, from what I could remember, didn't have any characters from the video games other than the zombies and I think the liquor, but actual human characters. They got some more. I think in the second one they had added Jill as a side character and a couple others. But yeah, the first one, from what I could remember, didn't even have a single character from the movie. So that was my, or from the video game. So that was my biggest problem, and why I was so disappointed is it wasn't horrible, but it's just like when I want to see a video game movie, I want to see these characters that I love playing as in the video games and stuff. So really disappointed with that.
As a fan of those movies, and actually not so much of the games, I've never played a Resident Evil, but I've seen all of the Resident Evil movies. I completely agree in that it was always bizarre that none of the characters were being passed along. I actually saw the final chapter, the one that we were just talking about a minute ago, just a couple months back in quarantine, just to kind of finally wrap things up on that series. And I enjoyed it. It was what it was. I don't know. I don't remember so many of the initial films, but they literally could have called the whole series, Alice's Adventures or something like that. It didn't need to be Resident Evil specifically. It was a
Yeah.
zombie film, and I think back in the early to mid 2000s, like 2010 ish, I think there were tons and tons of zombie movies, and sort of that has shifted in culture somewhat. So they were good, but yeah, it was bizarre that the character tie-ins were
Yeah,
mostly non-existent.
They were
yeah, and
sparse.
I could see why you, as having not played Resident Evil games, wouldn't mind the movies or would be a fan of the movies, because yeah, they're at least I haven't seen all of them, but the ones I saw are, like I said, aren't terrible as just like movies themselves, but the fact that they really don't have much to do with the video games is bothersome to me. So I could see for you having not played Resident Evil games, you don't have that connection as much. So you might just look at them as like, oh, it's a cool zombie movie or whatever.
Yeah, they were very much, sci-fi, Matrixy, Kill Bill, like female lead, just super badass and
Yeah.
just crushing everything.
And it's strange, like the idea of, like you just mentioned, a female lead being like super tough and crushing everything. They could have done that with existing characters. Like in the first game, they have Jill, and is as the main one of the main characters. And in the second game, they have Claire as one of the main characters. So they could have used either one of them. I mean, maybe they didn't because they don't have the powers, or they were kind of different from what Alice was. So maybe they figured, let's just create a new character. But they did already have two strong female characters in the first two games, so it's strange that they went with a whole new character, unless, like I said, maybe they just figured the character that they wanted to use was too different, so they figured, let's just create a new one. But yeah, it's interesting.
I have a feeling give it a few years, and within the gaming community, we'll kind of learn from that actress, and just I'm sure from some of the behind the scenes, like why did they take the direction that they did, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
actually, a lot of that has been explored, and Resident Evil media is a huge tangent in and of itself, and it's very timely. Speaking as a fan of the Resident Evil video games first, I thought the first movie is still pretty decent as like a Resident Evil adaptation. It was originally supposed to be sort of tied into the canon of the games as like an origin story for the outbreak, which was later retconned by Resident Evil Zero, or why the Spencer Mansion was overrun with the virus. Alice might be name dropped at some point in one of the games, but I'm pretty sure she's actually fully separated from the game canon at this point, and the movies became their own Resident Evil canon. They slowly brought over some of the characters as Jill appears in number 2, and then I believe Claire is in number 3. They eventually have Chris. They do bring back Jill later, inspired by her events in Resident Evil 5. Wesker becomes the main villain throughout the thing, I think, starting in 3, maybe in 2. He might be in the Easter egg section. Or not the Easter egg, but the I think there's a stinger, and Wesker's shown up in there. I don't think Leon's ever in it, but I'd have to double check on that. And then of course, they brought over a bunch of the enemies because that's the coolest thing about one of the coolest things about the Resident Evil games. So those are super easy to adapt for movies to give the heroes something to fight against. And yeah, Alice just going off the rails, getting superpowers. But they made 7 movies. They're good popcorn flicks, and they're not great adaptations. But they sold, and I think it was 7 movies, 7 or 8. And I saw 4 in theaters. I may have seen the fifth one by like Blu-ray or rental or something like that. But at that point, I was just like, this is never going to come back to what the first movie was. So I gave up on that series. However, there are 3 CG movies that Capcom produced that do use the characters and are directly tied into game canon softly. And soft canon means it doesn't, as long as it doesn't conflict with what the games do, it counts. So, and me and Paul were talking about this as well. So there's those 3 CG movies out there that people can watch, and they're also leaning more towards like popcorn movie-esque, but they're far more faithful in terms of like they're using the actual characters, they're tied into the game stories, and actually take into account events prior to set up their current situations. So that's great there. And then in timely news, they are rebooting the Resident Evil movie series, and they're doing a new live action series that's supposed to be way more or live action movie that's supposed to be way more faithful. And maybe I'm mixing up some of this because I thought they're also doing a movie. But Netflix is doing 2 projects in which they are doing a live action series that is supposed to be its own side timeline, something with like Wesker's twin daughters, and I'd have to know more about it, but that's in and of itself, right, that line right there made me go, ugh, I don't know about this. But we'll see. If it's horror themed, it could be very good horror, and I could be very into that. And Resident Evil does have a certain camp to it, but that's the thing, is it needs to have legit trying to be a horror movie and not all camp in order to make it work. It just has to be like some very silly melodramatic stuff to really be Resident Evil. But it has, at its core, the characters have to be trying to take it seriously while ridiculous stuff is going on around it. And then Netflix says the second thing is Resident Evil Infinite Darkness, which is a CG series that is being adapted, and they've shown that Claire Redfield and Leon Kennedy will be starring in that. I think the timeline's a little dubious, but it is going to be related to the games, much like the CG stuff. I'm super excited for that, and definitely we'll talk about more of those when we get more information about them. But yeah, they are not letting Resident Evil die, and also Capcom likes what the guy, I forget who the director was, but likes him, and his wife is Mila Jovovich, who played Alice in the Resident Evil movies. And Mila Jovovich will be the new starring character in the Monster Hunter movie series, with the first adaptation coming out sooner rather than later. A small teaser just went out, and I might talk about that just a little bit. But yeah, Capcom is down to make movies of its two biggest series.
Yeah, Infinite Darkness looks awesome. They just only have the teaser for Netflix, but from the teaser, it looks amazing. I love Claire and Leon. Claire's probably my favorite character of the Resident Evil series, and Leon's always great. So I like right away that they have characters, and because it's CG, they look just like they do in the video game. And based on the teaser, it looks very creepy, very horror, suspense, stuff like that. So I'm really excited. But I can move on to a video game adaptation that I do like, unless you had anything else to add about the Resident Evil stuff.
I'm sorry, that was just a side tangent. You keep going.
No, cool. All right, yeah. So my favorite video game movie adaptation, I think all of you guys touched on it a little bit, but is the Mortal Kombat movie. I believe it came out in 1995. The first one, we won't talk about Annihilation. That was kind of rough. But anyway, so the first one, so it's kind of the opposite of the way I feel about the Resident Evil movie series, where I thought they were very faithful to the game. It's not perfect. They have some storyline stuff that's not exact, but overall, I thought they really got it right. I mean, the characters look great as far as like how they do in the video games. The story, Liu Kang's the main character. He's the guy that wins it all, that defeats it and saves Earth and all that stuff. Johnny Cage is the cool guy. They even added stuff from the games, like after Johnny Cage defeats Scorpion, he signs his autograph and throws it kind of like he does in the I think that was his friendship in Mortal Kombat 2. So I thought that was really cool. I mean, and I think the fight scenes even today still hold up pretty well. A lot of times you see those movies from the 90s during that like early era of CGI, and it's like stuff that you thought maybe was awesome when you were a kid. You look at it now and it's like, ooh, that's rough. But for the most part, I think the fight scenes still look really cool. There's not too much cringeworthy stuff. But yeah, overall, I think it's a great movie. Like I said, I could still watch it today and be happy with it, be a fan of it.
What was that movie rated? PG or PG-13?
Pretty sure it was R.
Was it R?
I don't
In
know.
the 90s, they weren't. I
was-
feel like that was like
was
the
loose.
80s when they were gung ho with R movies. 90s, I thought they were like backing off and trying to get a larger.
I'm gonna look it up
audience.
right now. I don't think it was R because there's no like
trying to
swearing or
find it.
anything, and it's
Trying to
not
work
that
Yeah, I'm trying to find
it's
it.
not
right
that
Yeah.
violent.
Well,
I was gonna say PG actually, but
yeah.
Oh,
reason
that
I just found it, IMDb PG-13. I was
Okay. That
I
makes
was
sense, I
7
guess.
years old and went to the movies with some friends of mine. Probably a parent brought us, and I remember getting in tons and tons of trouble. So it was kind of like the movie that I wasn't really supposed to see, but I saw it in theaters. I got in trouble for it. It was a great movie, and I honestly, Paul, without you and I talking, I knew you were going to bring it up, and that's kind of why I held on to it at the beginning and didn't really want to shed too much more into it. But yeah, I think it's held up. It's definitely got a big following. I mean, granted, the game series also continues, which I think a lot
Yeah.
of the games that we've talked about today do. But something I thought was somewhat almost mind-boggling to me, the list that I was talking about earlier with the top 5 grossing movies, Mortal Kombat actually has the highest Metacritic rating of all movies on this Hollywood film list, with a 58 out of 100, which also kind of speaks into the video game movies generally don't do super hot.
Yeah.
But a 58, yeah, usually not super great, but also very
best.
impressive that Mortal Kombat owns, and take it for what it's worth. This is
Yeah.
in no way like it's the best video
Yeah.
game movie, but a
That's
lot of the
honestly
movies on
Metacritic?
here.
Is that Metacritic or Rotten Tomatoes?
This is from Metacritic. There is also a Rotten Tomatoes list, which I don't think it is on the very top. Let's see.
That's the
No,
thing that's
actually-
surprising me, is because I feel like Detective Pikachu or any of the other Pokemon movies might have been rated slightly like
Yeah.
slightly higher because they're just more family friendly, so they just work out better. But like that doesn't surprise me. Also, is like Mortal Kombat is so much more specifically a video game thing that I could totally see that being rated really high.
Yeah, I think that helped, is how faithful it was. And like I said, as far as the fighting scenes holding up, that might have helped too. I think the choreography is really good, and if I remember correctly, I think I read that those actors and actresses did their own stunts. As far as like the guy who played Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, Sonya.
Nice.
Like, I think I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. But I think I remember reading that they all did their own stunts and fighting scenes, so that probably helps it to make it look a little more realistic as well. So that could be a reason for the higher rating compared to some of those other movies.
Yeah, I did want to quickly add on your a comment, Paul, that about there was nothing really cringy. I'm like, no, no, no. There is plenty of cringe in that movie, but all of that cringe is in line and perfectly works for that movie. So
Very
that's
true.
where like Johnny Cage is a cringy character, but that's
Yes.
what you want from Johnny Cage. So yeah,
100%.
they nailed that movie so hard, and it's really disappointing, but it seems like they like a lot of sequels. It's almost like a game thing. They just tried to do too much with that second
Way
movie
too much. Yeah.
because like they mixed in Mortal Kombat 2 and 3 and
And
they
even like some
yeah.
Ultimate, I think, like trilogy, they were getting into everything. Yeah.
Well, there were multiple MK3 had multiple adaptations and that or
Hmm.
not, iterations because that's the thing. MK3 had like Ultimate and I think there was a
Right,
couple
right.
other things. However, despite all that, like that first movie is still beloved and it's in every single conversation like this one today. And Mortal Kombat's adaptations is also one of the more prolific ones as well. When we look at the list here, there's been the web series Mortal Kombat. I think it was Legacy Legends. I was just looking at it. No, no, Mortal Kombat Legends: Scorpion's Revenge is an animated, essentially redo of the first movie, more from Scorpion's perspective, and also adapting more of the lore that the games have shown off. I've yet to watch it, but I'm super impressed. It's fully animated. It's put out by WB, and boy, do I need to watch that. There was the web series that they put out that was also kind of more of a grounded take on the Mortal Kombat lore. I'm trying to find that again. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Mortal Kombat Legacy, which was from 2011, 2013, and then eventually was released on Blu-ray. And then the funniest thing is because these were meant to be rated M games, and Mortal Kombat is notorious for being one of the few games, or one of the key games in getting the ESRB formed because of its violence and being exposed and well received by children. So it's also funny to think that a series that has played into its brutal violence to a comic
Mhm.
degree, but nonetheless like gory detail, then spawned children's cartoons with Mortal Kombat Defenders of the Realm, and I believe it was a sequel series, Mortal Kombat Conquest in the late 90s as well. And I think they're still planning on doing a new movie. Let me check here. Oh, it's saying animated film. There's another one called Mortal Kombat: The Journey Begins, but I'm not going to read into that right now. I know nothing about it off the top of my head. And then, oh, short film Mortal Kombat Rebirth was in 2010. I don't know what that one's about either. I think there is rumor also that they still want to do another Mortal Kombat film, and considering the video games just rebooted themselves with Mortal Kombat 9 and then Mortal Kombat 10 and 11. Well, it's not called Mortal Kombat 9, but I forget what the year is for that one.
It was
Um,
2011, I believe.
Okay, cool. So that one, which is just self-titled Mortal Kombat in 2011, but colloquially known as MK9, was a hard reboot for the series, lore-wise at least. And then 10 and 11 have been extremely successful. So yeah, Mortal Kombat's another one that just keeps on kicking, and more often than not, it's really hit. Although the cartoon series never got into any of the gore, it just used the beloved characters.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish more adaptations would be that way, where they like I said, it's not perfect. They don't do everything 100% to the video game, but you wouldn't expect it to. It'd be too difficult. I think they do as good of a job as possible. Like you said, they nailed it with Johnny Cage, even though he's very cringeworthy. I think when he first meets Liu Kang, he just like he figures he's there to just carry his bags. Just he has just stuff like that. And
Yep.
but that's Johnny Cage. That's what you would think he would be. And he actually kind of grows as a character. By the end, he ends up challenging Goro pretty much to like save everybody else from having to face him. So yeah, definitely a good one. Definitely still holds up. So that's my top pick. But Ryan, we haven't heard from you, so I'm curious to see what you think. Unless you have anything else to add about Mortal Kombat.
Okay, yeah. So my turn, and it's just I did look into a bunch of stuff, and as I was looking just to see how much stuff was adapted, I realized more and more how much I've actually seen because there was bringing up the Mortal Kombat cartoon. There are so many cartoon adaptations that happened in the mid to late 90s of those things. There was Mortal Kombat, there was Street Fighter, there was Mario, the Super Mario Funhouse it might have been called. I'm completely messing up that name. But then there was like the Nintendo crossovers with I think it might have been Captain N Adventures. And yes, I'm going to butcher a bunch of these titles because I can't remember these. There was the Zelda cartoon, there was the Donkey Kong CG cartoon. There has been so much that I've watched there, and then the movies that we've already talked about. And there's some big heavy hitters like Warcraft that I don't think any of us here may have watched. I don't know if any of us are fans of Warcraft, but that's like one of those. Obviously, all the Pokemon movies, all the Resident Evil movies. Capcom also put out Dragon's Dogma just recently as another animated series on there, but I've heard middling things on Netflix in regards to that series. But yeah, the more you delve deeper in there, there's so many adaptations of video games, and it's such a mixed bag. It's been getting better, and a lot of you guys have named my favorites, and I forget like Rampage, yes, is loosely based on the arcade game of the same name, but then also Need for Speed had a live action movie. There's been plenty of anime adaptations of other things that haven't been huge, but they exist. Let me pull up my list here, put that to the side. Oh yeah, there's been Mega Man had the cartoon. Sonic has had Sonic X on top of a couple other little spin-off animateds on top of a long-running comic series. Ratchet and Clank got their own movie that was tied into the reboot of the video game series. Final Fantasy put out their terrible standalone movie Spirits Within, which I did see in theaters and was horribly disappointed in. But then also they produced the tie-in canon installment of Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, which was amazing. And there's an anime I haven't watched, but that still exists also. Kirby, right back at you. Whoever brought that up in chat before, thank you very much for reminding me. Pokemon, of course, has been there forever. Heavenly Sword, another little animated adaptation coming from that. Silent Hill had two movies. The first Silent Hill movie, I actually think, really good. It is, as far as an adaptation, I haven't really played the Silent Hill game, so I can't say it's that great. And from what I've heard, it steps on a few things. But the first movie is at least okay. It's watchable. I thought it was definitely a really creepy movie. And I want to touch on Halo again. I did watch Halo Legends, and I was really impressed by that. But also, I think it's worth mentioning Red vs. Blue, the ongoing series from Rooster Teeth, that isn't directly tied into Halo, but constantly uses Halo assets and has been allowed to go on for multiple seasons. I'm very surprised that or at least I haven't heard of any talks in which Microsoft wants to make a spin-off game based on the Red vs. Blue series, but it seems like they should, especially with Halo Infinite, having its development issues. I think we could use a third-person action game in the Halo universe to kind of spice things up. They did the RTS. There's no reason not to try and do spin-offs there. And then there's also been a bunch of other one-offs. And me being like the resident anime fan here, I'll list off a few ones that if you guys don't recognize, definitely viewers will. Ed, you probably brought up Steins Gate was a very successful anime that actually was adapted from
Yeah.
a visual
I haven't
novel
played
game.
or watched either, but I hear they're very good.
I do have to watch it. I probably don't have I know I don't have the patience for visual novels, but I do want to watch the anime as it is extremely well critically praised, and it does have 2 seasons, I believe. But Persona has had adaptations for 4 and 5. Bayonetta got an animated movie, straight to DVD release. F-Zero had an anime series, and I'm sure Mike would be happy to know that I brought up F-Zero there. The Dot Hack series is one of the more closely tied projects where they actually released anime episodes with each installment of the original Dot Hack games, and has since had multiple adaptations that tie directly into the games, if not just being canon alongside them. Tales of has had adaptations there. Blaze Blue had some adaptations. And yeah, a lot of these are fighting games, but I'm the fighting game guy. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney had an anime series as well. And then there's just a bunch of others. And some, like Tekken has had a few animated series. Dead or Alive Tekken has also had a live action movie that was not very good. I did not watch it, but I heard about it. Dead or Alive, same thing. I don't think they have anything, but any animated stuff, but they do have the live action movie. Also, same thing, just not that great. And it's crazy. And of course, video games also have inspired, as long as I'm talking about anime, the isekai genre, of which that is about people getting trapped inside video game worlds, typically MMOs, but it can be other things. among others like Wreck-It Ralph and Ready Player One, which are just inspired by video games. So all of this media is so amazing, and when it since it's not going to be my dream thing because it's going to happen. It was going to be Kingdom Hearts, but just a couple months ago it was leaked and confirmed that there is a Kingdom Hearts animated series coming out for Disney Plus, and I'm
Really?
very
It's the
happy to
first
hear.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it probably got lost in the shuffle. I don't remember if I brought it up in our chat, but it is happening, and that's exactly what I'm hoping for. It's been something that's been in the works for years, but they just couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with it. So glad they're finally settling on something. Still could be canceled. It's very early production, like we don't even see screenshots of it, but it definitely makes sense for Disney Plus and to bring that there. And I've always thought that there is just no reason that Disney should not leverage the Kingdom Hearts franchise, especially since they do tons of crossover tie-in stuff in their own side cartoons as well. So just taking that Kingdom Hearts thing and especially since they do like the graphic novels as well as side stuff on top of all the games. But there's a resurgence happening, and so I'm very happy that that's on the way, and I'm cautiously optimistic that on what that project will be. So yeah, a lot of that stuff is really cool. It's been super mixed results. I have my thoughts and feelings about adaptations, which I'm more about like it's video games. Just do it animated. It just makes more sense. There's already tons of great voice actors. You can easily have them voice the characters, but it's not Hollywood talent and big names, and it's just I don't think that does justice to what the series are, and I think a lot of the stuff hasn't done justice to the series. Certain things, it doesn't really matter. Like when Doom was adapted, it's like, okay, you put The Rock in it. This is like a good action premise that you can kind of do anything with, and that makes a lot of sense. The Doom guy wasn't really fleshed out much. And now that video games are much more like movies, sticking to Doom, if you play the new Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal, it's basically like a sci-fi action movie in and of itself, and you get tons of action and there's more characterization and lore to the world, and you don't really need a movie or a series for it. But there's the reason adaptations, in my opinion, are still very necessary is because it grows the fan base, and there will always be people who just don't want to. Hang on, let me rephrase that. There's always a skill gap to playing a video game and enjoying a video game, and not everyone is willing to or able to get into that, despite the fact that they might end up liking the property. Now, online video with YouTube and Twitch streaming has made that a lot more accessible, and I think the popularity of those goes to show people can get invested in those properties, and then TV series and movie adaptations of those is just another way to help honor and explore those properties. So, really excited about the stuff going forward. And I do want to segue over into us talking about our dream projects. But does anyone else have any thoughts on, what you like to see in a video game adaptation? We've kind of touched on that more, but if anyone's got any more specific thoughts, so let me toss back over to Mark. Thoughts on just
Yeah.
what makes a good video game adaptation to you?
Well, it's not necessarily that. Like, what I'm thinking of is, everybody on the podcast today, we all enjoy video games. It's a form of entertainment, as you were talking about, and it's, in my opinion, way more immersive than watching a movie. So
Mhm.
it's different. It's tough to say, how could you make a movie better than a video game? Because in my opinion, I need that interaction. I need that immersion that a movie is not necessarily going to give me unless, hook up VR or something crazy to like literally put me in there. But that's sort of what I look at is just, it's a different platform. So I really enjoy kind of like creating my story, even though, yes, I know millions of others are having that very similar story with, single player games and whatnot.
Actually, let me change my question because you made good points there, and we've all kind of talked about what we appreciate in there. So a better question for the group would be: have you seen an adaptation of a video game that has made you more interested in that video game and has either pushed you to try it or at least made you think about playing it? And I'll toss over to Ed first.
Well, the ones that I've seen, Detective Pikachu, no, I'm pretty much over Pokemon at this point. Not because I feel like I'm too old for it. I've really fallen out of love with the whole monster collection thing. I know there's other games that have that mechanic, and I tend to avoid. Sonic, Probably not. I'm not a huge fan of platformers anymore, even though I used to be. Castlevania, yeah, I'd actually like to play more of the games. I think earlier this year I bought Symphony of the Night, and part of that is because I do enjoy the genre, and I earlier this year also played Super Metroid, so I thought I should probably take it upon myself to, play the two games that birthed the, okay, I'll call it the labyrinth game genre. Other than that, I no, not really. Um, and I guess that comes down to the fact that I can, you know, enjoy any movie or film that is good. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to a game that I like. I think anything with a, rich lore and well-developed characters can succeed. And maybe that's not that encouraging in terms of getting people into the game, because if me, a gamer, doesn't feel like super inspired to follow up on the franchise in terms of their interactive experiences, then maybe the average moviegoer isn't going to feel that way either. But I guess if only a few people become more interested in the franchise, it's still worth it. And it does make them money. So, Sega can take that Sonic the Hedgehog movie money and hopefully make a better Sonic game.
Hopefully, they seem to be taking their time. But you did say that you are more interested in Castlevania and looking a little deeper. So that right there does speak to slightly more interest. But at least you didn't speak to anything going like making you more repulsed. And I think you made a good point on the lore, if anything's got good lore and strength. And I think that's part of why movies and series adaptations are so good, is because it can expose people directly to the lore instead of making them have to work for it, which I think from time to time is a very good thing.
But for me, it's definitely about, the gameplay. I mean, I know I'm not a big fan of platformers, and I'm not a big fan of those monster collecting games, which I used to be as when I was younger, but not anymore. But I do like Metroidvanias, so I would like to play more of those Castlevania games. But I will not be going back and playing the pre-Symphony Night games because that's just not in the style that I enjoy. So, if a movie comes out and I know I would enjoy that genre, because, at this point in my life, I do have a better handle on the kind of games that I do like to play. For many years, I would try different games, and part of that is just exploring genres and learning your tastes. But now I'm a little more in tune with what I would like, so it's a little easier for me to identify where I'd like to go deeper.
Okay. And then, Paul, have you seen any adaptations that have made you more interested in the video game they're based on?
No, I don't think so. And the reason for that, I would say, is because I haven't watched any adaptations that I didn't already like you know what I mean? So like if
Yeah, yeah.
I tend to only watch stuff like, oh, I like this video game, so I'm going to check this out. I haven't really gone out of my way to watch anything that's an adaptation that I haven't already played, just because I don't know. The part of the reason why I watch it is because I like the video game. So yeah, I really haven't seen any that have got me into a video game series, mainly just because I don't think I've watched any. So I tend to just stick with ones that I know.
Okay. And tossing back to Mark then.
I think you guys are all liars. I think Super Mario Brothers was one of the first movies many of us saw, and then we wound up going to play how many of their games
Oh
for
man.
decades. No, I kind of agree. I mean, Resident Evil, as we were talking about this today, that was kind of the first one that I'm like, that's one series that I really enjoyed, and as far as the film, but never actually played the game. But the game just never really ignited my interest. So I would also have to say no, not so much as far as a movie enticing me to try out the game.
Okay. For me, it's pretty much the same story as everyone else, where I pretty much watch the media because I'm interested in the game originally, and then I'll check out the TV show or that. But upon reflecting, I did realize that, and these two are so closely tied together, it's almost unfair to say this, but Ratchet and Clank, I'm planning on playing the new Ratchet and Clank, and I have to say I'm really interested because not only did I play a little bit of the reboot game, but the reboot game did have the movie, and those two are tied together in a weird way. So I'm more interested in trying that out, and I think that it's partially to understand. Oh, they actually made like an animated movie, and that really makes a lot of sense. And the new character designs look good, and it's got this really kind of kooky looking story. So yeah, I think I'm gonna say, there being a Ratchet and Clank cartoon or not cartoon, but the animated feature. I haven't watched the full thing, but I'm aware of it. So I would say that has partially helped make me more interested in Ratchet and Clank. But yeah, I was just curious. It seemed unlikely, but it was worthwhile asking if people were interested got more interested in that because we've been mentioning it. We think that that's probably what happens for some of them. But for us who are more interested on the video game side, it seems that it is more purely we already know what games we like, and we watch the movies because they're based on those games.
I will say one thing you said I think is very accurate, that playing games there is a skill barrier, and even for myself, if I'm really just burnt out from the day, I almost prefer just to plop down and watch TV or a movie, because there is a level of engagement that when you're playing video games that I think it makes you have to think and try a little more than if you're watching TV. And some people just don't want to deal with that. Even me sometimes, but I do think there is something rewarding about actually, you know, making the story happen on your own. It's one reason why I, I don't really enjoy watching people stream games, and I kind of resist going through and watching cutscenes or story recaps, because, I feel like if I'm gonna go through a video game story, I should be the one to make it happen.
Oh yeah, and I more specifically watch people stream games if I've already beaten the game. So I've done this because I'm so in love with the Resident Evil games that I've beaten the games and then I go back and I watch some of my favorite streamers play them because I know that they're super fans as well and see their reactions. So then I'll watch that, and that's usually what I'll do. Or I'll use it as a preview, kind of like what you're saying. There's I avoid the cutscenes, but I'll be like, okay, what does like the first hour of this game look like? Is it actually good? Is it actually panning out the way I want it to? And then that helps me decide whether or not to rent, buy, or even bother with the game.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because possibly due to the pandemic, probably I've gotten really into watching streamers this year, Twitch streamers and stuff, both for games that I have played for reason that you mentioned, and also games that I haven't played just to see what they look like. But yeah, I don't know. There's something that I've gotten really addicted to, just like watching people play and seeing the reactions and stuff.
Yeah, so oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the new Jumanji movies, which have the the board game turns into a video game. And at first, I just was appalled at the idea of a Jumanji sequel, but after seeing the first movie and being upon recommendation, I genuinely enjoyed it. And then they did the sequel, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm down to see it. I just have to take the time to watch it in some way. So that's another thing where, yeah, inspired by video games and just the world of video games, I think especially if they take the time to have some fun with it in movies, there's a lot you can draw from that. So that's where a lot of this allure comes from and why we're talking about it today. So now for this last segment, we're going to go around and just talk about what we think our dream project would be. And you can get into as much detail as you'd want or as little, and you can be completely unrealistic, which is completely fine. So whether that's a movie, a TV series, just a short little adaptation thing, or maybe you really don't even want to, which is fine as well, and just talk about that. So we'll go back around the room here, and we'll start with Mark. What is your dream project?
I think I started covering the specifics earlier, so I apologize, but
Oh, it's fine.
likely already in development, the Gears franchise, the first Gears movie. I think I covered a lot of it already, but just sort of that third person, in your face, gritty, bloody sort of approach to a movie. I think would follow the games great. I did a little reading, and apparently it's not going to be based off of any game, so it would likely include brand new characters. I would love to kind of see what else they can do. They have had a few games in the past year now that have kind of explored that main plot line. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at now.
So compared to that information about what the project is like now, if you were in control, what would you want the project to be? Like, let me start first by asking, would you want it to be live action, or would you maybe want it to be
Oh yeah,
animated using like the Unreal Engine though, and being able to look like the game?
good question. Definitely live action. I think with the graphics these days, I think that pretty much is going to come as close to a video game kind of approach that we can get. But funny you asked that because something I meant to bring up earlier too. So they added Dave Bautista, who I believe is also a wrestler. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. Right?
Yes, yes, or
Yes.
he
Okay.
was. I
He
don't.
was.
He doesn't actively wrestle anymore. He'll sometimes
Okay.
be on, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought so, and I want to just get that clarity. So thank you. They actually added him because he has expressed his interest to star in the lead role for years now. Like it's very
Yeah.
public. He's said it like, you guys have to put me in a movie if you make a movie, and they've basically said no, but we will add you to the game, and they finally did that just last year. So as far as all that goes, yeah, live action. It would be fun to kind of have the big muscle kind of characters, maybe like Dave Bautista or others. But yeah, I'm not too specific as far as exactly what I want. I think they'll do a good job, but it just comes down to if and when, because here we are a year after it was sort of confirmed again, but we need to see a trailer, I think, to really know that all right, this is actually going to happen.
Yeah, and with the Gears games having gone pretty far in their lore, would you prefer the story to be something more of like an origin tale that takes place before? Because there's a good period of time before the first game that's not really covered, or Judgment, which is also a prequel. Is
Right.
there what time period in the game series would you be most interested in? Would it be like before, kind of during the primary trilogy, or would you like to see the aftermath, or would you like to see it be a series and kind of touch on all those points?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would probably lean more towards a series because there are a couple major events, and I feel like I can say spoilers because some of these things have happened well over 10 years at this point. But like playing with my two brothers, like I remember we almost all were like in tears, crying, like just, and I've never ever felt that way playing any other game, and that's why this series has always kept such a close place in my heart. And that even talking about it now, like it's emotional, and getting that from a video game, trying to get that across in film as well. Like I think it's crazy, and I'm actually reading all the books all the way from the beginning, which was sort of my quarantine goal. And I'm early enough in, but there's already been a couple emotional pieces that have already tugged at my strings.
Hmm. Okay, and then do you have any thoughts on it being movies and multiple movies versus having more like a series, like either a Netflix or some sort of online streaming? Do you have any thoughts on those two ideas or what you'd prefer?
Yeah, I definitely prefer kind of a one and done. I'm not super crazy about the Netflix series as far as, it could have potentially been a movie, but then they just stretched it out, and because it feels too much like an episode, and it's like, all right, well, here we're going to take a commercial break, and we're going to end off on a cliffhanger so that you watch the next episode or you renew your subscription to get the next season next year or something. Like it just, that stuff always rubs me the wrong way, and I see right through it. So I'm more for the hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it may be, of just, here it is, here's the end product, and go from there.
Oh yeah, and you'd assume that when we're speculating here, that they'd be done the way you wanted to. So if they had purported that they're going to do a miniseries, maybe 6 episodes, and that's it, one season of that,
Still
would
gonna
you?
watch it.
Oh yeah, you're still going to watch it.
Yeah.
Would you be more or less excited for it based on that if it was like, yeah, we're doing a one and done, but instead of doing like the movie, it's going to be just this miniseries, like 6 episodes, about 50 minutes apiece. Would that make you feel bad in that regard, or would you be just about as excited as you would for like 1 2 hour movie?
I'd be excited either way. Like,
Huh.
besides Assassin's Creed, maybe, like, I feel like there hasn't been. I mean, I guess Sonic is up there too,
Oh yeah,
but
that's right. Assassin's
like,
Creed had a movie, a
like
live
what?
action movie.
Right? Like, what is the largest netting game that was converted into a movie? Like, I feel like obviously Halo, hands down, one of the biggest. So if it did turn into a movie, that would be tremendous. Gears definitely doesn't have that same following, but I would be interested. Like either way, it's not like I'm not going to watch it, but my phone's
Yeah,
on if they want to call me and get my opinion on it. Let's
very
do
cool.
this.
Well, yeah, looking forward to hearing more details on those, and we can always revisit this when some of our favorite stuff is out, and we can maybe do a big episode reviewing that. But that's for the future. Paul, what would be your dream project? And I'm probably going to ask you a lot of the same questions here, so feel free to
Mhm.
take it bit by bit.
Well, I guess my biggest one would be something we already kind of touched on. Is I wanted to see a more faithful Resident Evil movie or series. It looks like we might get that series based on Infinite Darkness Netflix show that we talked about.
Mhm.
Like I mentioned earlier, my biggest complaint about the movie series was that for the most part it wasn't faithful to the games. It didn't have enough of the characters. The main character wasn't in the video games, all that stuff. So that would probably be my main dream, or would have been my main dream, would be to get a series or movie that is much more similar to the video games, has video game characters, and at least based on the teaser for Infinite Darkness, it looks like we might get that. So
Mhm.
something else, I guess I'll go with two here since that one is kind of already happening. I think it would be cool to get a Super Mario movie that is like a fully animated movie, because to my knowledge we haven't had that. We had the old school Mario Brothers movie that I think Mark might have brought up, the live action one that really wasn't anything like the video game at all. And then there's of course the classic Super Mario Brothers Super Show animated
Yes,
series from when
yes.
we were kids. But yeah, to my knowledge, we haven't had an actual movie really since then. I mean, with how popular Mario is, I'm surprised we haven't had something like that. I think it would be really cool. I'm kind of with you, Ryan. Is I'm not much of a fan of the mixing of CGI or animation and live action. So I think it would be really cool to get just a fully animated Mario movie that was very faithful to the games. I think that would be a lot of fun. I think it would do really well.
So that's excellent you brought that up. I was actually saving this for the end of the show, but Mario is getting a fully animated movie done by Illumination Studios, known for Despicable Me and Minions. So,
Well, there we
based
go.
off that information, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I
I,
guess I
I,
would just
mhm.
like it to be faithful, as would be my only thing I'd like to add. But yeah, go ahead.
I read an interview or a brief snippet from an interview about what convinced Nintendo to team up with Illumination and do another movie. From what I understood, Nintendo was just super scared off from working with Hollywood and doing any sort of movie adaptations of their properties after the Mario movie was handled so poorly, came out so poorly, was so poorly received, and now it's infamous rather than famous. And apparently Miyamoto spoke with the CEO or one of the top people in Illumination, and he was impressed because the Illumination executive said he talked about that they've learned a lot from their own mistakes, and that's why they think, and that was what impressed Miyamoto to say, hey, this might be a good idea and this might be a good team to work with. And so, obviously, negotiations worked out. COVID's probably put a big damper on the production schedule, but that's in the works. And hopefully, when it comes out, it'll pretty much just look like what we've seen all the Mario commercials with the CG Marios, and it'll just be a Mario adventure. No doubt it'll be 3D animated, considering that Illuminations and Minions and Despicable Me are full 3D movies. So we'll have to check in also when that does and do the inevitable comparison of Mario versus Sonic movies, the new Mario movie versus the new Sonic movie. With the Resident Evil again, I did want to quickly ask, and I think you touched on it there, is just your thoughts, because Resident Evil's art style is always been trying to trend towards stylized realism. Obviously, the PlayStation 1 games were limited in their graphic fidelity, but it was always trying to be grounded in the real world with a fantastic situation. So, with the CG and live action, how would you feel, or what are your feelings versus, it's just live action, but it's actually using the game characters, which is what they're supposed to be doing with the live action series that's coming to Netflix, versus just going full CG so the characters actually just look like the characters.
I'd be okay with either one. Like I said, I don't like the mix, but yeah, if they did just a live action, only live action, where they actually had characters from video games, I'd be cool with that. But like I said, that Infinite Darkness one that's coming to Netflix looks really good as well. Just
Mm-hmm.
being animated, it looks very much like the characters. So as long as it's done well, I'd be okay with either way.
Yeah, great, great. And then one last question would be, is there a specific part of the Resident Evil story from what you've experienced that you want adapted, or would you prefer it to be a fresh story inside the universe that the characters are tied into?
That's a good question. I think I would like maybe a little bit of both. I definitely would want some adaptations. I love the story from the first movie, from the first game. Where they go into the mansion. Maybe it's just because it was the first one and there was so much unknown. I just love the idea of going into like this mansion in the middle of nowhere and exploring and coming across all this stuff for the first time. I don't know necessarily how well that would translate into a movie. Maybe it would be kind of cool as like a suspense horror movie. But I love that, and I also liked the um, the story a lot in Resident Evil Code Veronica X, which is
Hmm.
probably my favorite Resident Evil game, because they get really deep into the lore there. Like they go way back into like how the origins of like Umbrella and the Spencer
Yeah.
mansion, the family, all that stuff. I'm a big fan of that. The backstory, like the deep backstories like that. So I guess if I had to pick some elements of the video games that I'd want incorporated as far as story goes, I think it would be that. It would be elements from the first game where they are, kind of exploring through this unknown mansion, and then that deep backstory I like as well. But I'd be fine with a new story too, as long as it feels right, feels like it's done right, and done to where it makes sense.
Okay,
Um,
great.
have you
That sounds.
heard that as far as that goes? Is it going to be a whole new story, or it might be a little bit too early to know at this point?
I think the Infinite Darkness is going to be a new side story. I don't know the timeline. I don't know if those details are out there yet.
Okay.
The live action series is some like a post-apocalyptic. I think it takes place a while after everything. I forget the details. I think there are more details in the timeline there, and the casting for that has recently come out, so you can actually take a look and see who's there. But they cast Claire Redfield and Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, Jill Valentine, Wesker, William Birkin, and I feel like I'm missing, or maybe that's it because that's six. It was an
They're getting
even number.
everybody in there. That's cool. I like
Yeah,
it.
it's supposed to be like the core group there. I'm a little sad they're not mentioning Rebecca Chambers, but there's hope if things go on like that she'll get in there. And just so you know that she is in the CG movie Resident Evil Vendetta, and that's
Hmm.
her first appearance in any canonical material since her last appearance in Resident Evil 0, which is the game that released the latest, and Resident Evil Remake, which would be her latest canonical appearance in terms of the games. So,
So, since we're talking about this is probably something we'll get more into on a Resident Evil podcast. But
mhm.
what is, where is Rebecca as far as the canon goes? Because in theory, like if we're considering Jill's story as canon, then Rebecca doesn't really exist or never got out of the mansion because Jill never interacts with her. If we're considering Chris's canon, Barry is gone. Barry's never found, but they're both in other games. So I don't know if maybe Resident Evil just takes like a combination of Jill and Chris's story. But that's maybe a topic for another time. But I always thought that was interesting because if you play as Jill in the first Resident Evil game, you'd never even know about Rebecca. Like you never talk to her or meet her at all.
Yeah, so yeah, we can save that for the episode, but just to quickly summarize the answer, because I really want you to watch at least Resident Evil Vendetta. I had a good time watching that one.
Okay.
Um, is that she is alive, she did get out, and the game canon is kind of a mix of the stories, and it is messy in that regard, but we'll touch on that when it's times. But yeah,
Yeah,
she is canonically alive, and you basically hit the nails on the head there, and we'll get into more details
yeah. Cool.
separately. Okay then, Ed. Do you have a dream game property you'd want to see adapted into either a movie or series?
Yeah, for me, this is an easy answer, and that's Metroid.
Mm-hmm.
That's easily my favorite Nintendo franchise, and up there of any of all time, in my opinion. I know it's it is kind of a long shot, I think, because Metroid is really not the most popular game. I mean, I think
Yeah.
its lifetime sales are probably like 20 million of all games, and I mean it's not a big seller. But that's kind of what makes it special to me. It's not super popular. It's its own thing. I think it's no secret that Samus herself is kind of inspired by Ripley from the original Alien,
Yep.
and I think that Metroid series does that kind of horror suspense really well. Not all games are like that. Metroid, Metroid 2, and Super Metroid, they have their kind of interesting moments from a. I like the term nightmare fuel. You've used it before. I find that to be a funny term. But where it really starts to get that direction is with Fusion on the Game Boy Advance. That's easily my favorite one. I think it probably has the best combination of story, and it still has some non-linearity to it, but to have kind of a narrative, you do have to introduce a little linearity, which is controversial. But I don't know if anyone's played that here, but I mean, there's even a boss in that called Nightmare, so they're definitely going for that kind of suspense. You have your counterpoint that is a clone of you that is roaming the space station, causing havoc, and you cross paths with them. Sometimes you have to run away because you're too weak. I mean, I played that when I was maybe, I guess it must have been like 11. I think it came out in, or no, 12. I think it came out in 2002.
Mhm.
So I mean, that was a scary game for a kid, and it's very suspenseful. It's also the case that I haven't played that much of the Prime games. I played most of the Metroid Prime 1. The first person view isn't my favorite, so they're definitely on my list to
Yeah.
finish, but they're less interesting to me than the side scrollers. But those ones, you're constantly scanning things. There's lore everywhere. You're going into environments that have signs of life from the past and present. You're going into space pirate laboratories, seeing Metroid experiments. I mean, those ones, and you're running into enemies like Chozo ghosts, and there's all this lore from the Chozo. Metroid Zero Mission has that too. You're learning about Samus's upbringing with the Chozo and her origin story. So I think there's a lot to explore there, and there are a lot of themes that could work well in a movie. I don't think a TV series would be a good idea. I'm kind of with Mark here, and that tends to drag things out. And with rare exceptions, like I said, I think Castlevania does an excellent job with pacing. As for animated versus live action, I'm not a huge fan of 3D animation. I've always been more appreciative of traditional animation. So I
2D style.
suppose, yeah, 2D style, hand drawn. I suppose that if it had to be animated, I might enjoy something that is more anime styled, but I don't know if that really fits the Metroid universe. But I
I think
really
you could
think a
do it
live
right
action,
because there's a bunch of different
yeah,
types of anime styles. So we looked around and I showed you like a catalog of anime art styles. I think you could find one that would work that way. So and I'm kind of with you with that too. Like there is some really good 3D animation, like Pixar and Disney do fantastic work. But yeah, I'd be with you if I could get 2D level animation, not necessarily just hand drawn, whether it's computer or hand drawn, regardless. But yeah, I'm with you on that regard.
yeah, I think a live action adaptation would work the best. And
It definitely
I
could
don't
work.
go ahead.
I was gonna say I think live action for Metroid definitely could work. And I'm not saying every video game series couldn't work live action. I think like Resident Evil can be fine live action. I think The Last of Us and Uncharted, which are coming up, like same thing. It's about the series is the video game series itself aims for stylized realism in its in-game visuals, so adapting that to real life isn't that as far-fetched as taking Sonic the Hedgehog and putting him into the real world or other characters as well. So, yeah, and I have a follow-up question on that. So let me take a quick segue. What's your reaction to or your feelings on Brie Larson, who has softly campaigned herself online to play Samus Aran in a Metroid movie that ever happens?
I think she could be good. I mean, I think having a actress who knows and likes the character is only a positive for casting. I mean, she seems to be that. I haven't actually seen that many movies with her, except
Mhm.
for Captain Marvel, which wasn't necessarily my favorite Marvel movie. But she's a competent actress. I'm sure she could do a good job with Samus.
Yeah, and Samus doesn't like other than Metroid Other M, which is not very positively received. She doesn't really emote or do much, and from the comments I've seen online, people criticize Brie Larson for her emotional range in her performances. And based on Captain Marvel, I kind of agree. So I think with Samus, especially since it'd probably be good to see her with her helmet on most of the time, and for the few scenes where she does take off her helmet or whatnot, and it's a Hollywood movie if it was done, so they're going to take her helmet off a bunch. I think the idea of the Metroid universe, as you were pointing out rightly, is that there's a lot that isn't explored on top of what amount there is explored. And since it is taking place in space, you could easily have Samus going to places that have never been shown before and having these unique stories that could tie into the wider universe to be like, oh, that, or just these like Indiana Jones style adventures because she's kind of a space Indiana Jones. She is a bounty hunter. So her being alone exploring that could even be like tense horror thriller movies and her playing into being more or less vocal could definitely be a strength that maybe will tap into Brie Larson's strengths and allows for these movies to be much more faithful. But once again, that's also relying on Hollywood actually trying to respect source material and not try to make not try to go too crazy.
Well, I will say I have the slightly unpopular opinion that I did enjoy Other M. The script was weak and the acting wasn't great, but I could certainly see it's. I think it would be possible to have a characterization of Samus that does have some dialogue and introspection.
Hmm.
Um, Fusion does that. I mean, she does have dialogue with herself and with the computer. The writing is decent. It moves the story along, so I'm not opposed to her having lines. And I guess what you're saying without taking off the helmet, that's kind of like the argument against Sylvester Stallone's portrayal of Judge Dredd versus Carl Urban in the newer movie. You know,
Hmm.
Judge Dredd does not take off his helmet.
Yeah.
As far as how you could add to the universe, Fusion and Other M do some interesting things where they talk about some of the sinister stuff that the Galactic Federation does.
Hmm.
Sounds like they're a pretty sketchy organization with all the experiments they like to do with the Metroids and weaponizing them. That could be an interesting thing to explore. I also think it could be interesting to explore sort of the origin story of Samus. I mean, we only get bits and pieces of her time with the Chozo, but
Hmm.
I could see that being interesting.
There are some comics out there that do explore some of that lore a bit more, and from what I've heard, it's the lore is dubious at best. But yeah, I think for that, I could see uh, as someone who's probably played the most Metroid next to you, I would prefer if they worked in Samus's past at all, it would be like just bits and pieces that are relevant to the events that are going on, and then hopefully like a series style of either movies or an actual like online series where you just get bits and pieces over time that you get to do that. So every time there's a little bit of breadcrumbs and it just adds a bit without going too much, kind of like how Other M was almost like a big lore dump of what Samus used to be like when she was like a troubled near 20-year-old. So
Cadet, and
yeah, with her
Federation
thumbs
Army. Yeah,
down.
yeah,
Um,
that was a bit cringy.
yeah. I didn't hate that altogether. It's more of everything around it. Like you could have sold me on, oh, she was super rebellious. This makes total sense that she then became a bounty hunter, especially after she finds out that the Federation is just is got a bunch of sinister stuff going on underneath. So in that regard, like, but
Oh,
that's a taste thing also.
my
I don't know.
most wanted Metroid game itself is I want a continuation of Fusion because Fusion left off on a very interesting note. So I want to see what happens next.
Yeah,
I don't know if I want that to be in movie form, but I liked what they did with, like I said, the Galactic Federation and the backstory there.
yeah.
They, but I guess that is not necessarily focusing on Samus, but maybe focusing on Samus as the core character is the wrong approach given failures of Other M. But
No, I think
I
it's
would love
it's
to see a Metroid
it would
adaptation.
Yeah, I think it would be Samus has to be the core character because that's who everyone knows. But it's not about her and her past. It's just she is the character that is now entangled in that adventure because she works with the Federation so much or works around them. So I think you can do that without making it about Samus. But we're following Samus through this adventure. It's kind of like how James Bond movies are not about James Bond. It's about what James Bond is going through. So she's
I
Space
think
James
you've
Bond.
said before that Mad Max Fury Road is another way
Yes,
to have like a not completely silent protagonist, but one of a few words. And that
exactly.
one's not exactly about Mad Max himself. Like he's part of the story,
Hmm.
but he's not necessarily the driver.
Exactly. So there's smart ways that can do that that can be well done as film. Whether or not they'll be blockbusters, it's hard to say. But yeah, hopefully Metroid will continue on. Hopefully Metroid Prime 4 will be great so it sells well enough that it justifies more Metroid projects in the future so you can get all those things. Because I think Metroid is rife and I want to see Nintendo continue to make like this sci-fi. I think that their unique approach to game making is where like it's why I want Metroid to continue rather than just settle for other worlds to do sci-fi.
Yeah, I'm telling you, when Metroid Prime comes out, I'm gonna make all you guys get it. I'm gonna make Mike get it because they need every sale they can get. I might buy 3 copies. No, I'm just kidding. But I will always support their new games just because I want to show Nintendo that there is a demand for them.
Yep, I agree with you with that. So, for me, as I mentioned, Kingdom Hearts is already getting a series, and we'll see how that turns out. Resident Evil is getting a series and has had tons of content, Sonic, etc. And so, I actually kind of struggled to think like, oh man, if I had to wish on something new into this, what would I want? And I realized, and this is not an original idea, I would like to see BioShock adapted into a movie. Specifically, BioShock 1, that takes place in Rapture. And it kind of recaps the game, and we just select good pieces from the lore because the core story and thread through BioShock 1 is great. And the core mystery and the twist and everything there could translate really well into a movie. And you could tell a really succinct 2 hour story with that, exploring this creepy world. And while Infinite does have stuff that ties into and creates a Bioshock multiverse, essentially, I wouldn't want them to make too many references, but I'd love there to be little Easter eggs here and there that help allude to Infinite, but not necessarily guarantee, like, oh, we're trying to set up for a sequel. It's just like, yes, this is in a greater universe, and maybe that's a thing where they touch on some of those aspects that they didn't think about originally in Bioshock 1, which was tying it into this multiverse stuff. But sticking to the core plot there, which is, scientists were experimenting with things. They found the philosophical debate that occurs in there, and that being this whole backdrop for why this little pocket of society exists, what that leads to, that examination of it. Also, the twist of Would You Kindly, which is all I'm going to say for spoilers. So I think you could have that and translate that into a movie so well. I think Bioshock, just as one movie, could do really well. Otherwise, I do think series are more beneficial, not just for storytelling, because games are so big and long. Like naturally, you see these stories, and even if it's a game like Resident Evil, where a speed run can be an hour and a half long, but like a normal play session is about 10 to 12 hours, depending on how well you get through it or get hung up on any of the puzzles. Even that, I would still be like, I'd want like 3 or 4 episodes. Like you could like truncating even Resident Evil 1 down into a 2 hour movie. I still feel like you'd miss out on a few things because you need that character development. You need those time with each of those faces. Because if we had like a Resident Evil live action movie that was, in my vision, recapping the first movie, I'd want to be bouncing back and forth between Jill, Chris, Wesker, and Barry, and Rebecca, and like the two threads and how they're exploring the different mansions and what happens there. And you need some time to set up those mysteries. And maybe I'm just, I'm not a good enough writer to see how you could do that in 2 hours, but I don't think you'd realistically get like a 3 hour movie. Like, not every movie is going to be 3 hours. So I'd still rather have like, 4 50-minute episodes and let there be some more room to breathe, especially for a series like that. But with Bioshock, I definitely feel like you could really truncate that down. There's just enough action and stuff you could do there to make it enticing to people with a real good foundation of a plot and writing and a world that you could definitely do that and make one really good movie that just stands there and it's just fun and could be rewatchable. So that's what I'd want to see. I'd be okay with it being live action. Still, personally, I'd love to see it animated. I think it just makes more sense for that. But Bioshock, I think, once again, its world aims to be more grounded, but with good set design, and especially Big Daddies and the way they're designed, the little sisters, you could definitely achieve all that with practical effects or CG and some makeup and things like that. So I wouldn't hate it if it was live action, and I could definitely kind of see it more going live action, while my preference is still animated. So that's what I'd want to see there. I don't personally have any feelings about casting. I don't really get into the meta about actors, but with with the Metroid thing, Ed, I specifically had heard about Brie Larson and seen her soft campaigning to be that, and I was like, oh, you know what? I don't really have anything against her. I could see that, and her being a blonde woman also makes sense, but also just the role she plays and the way she presents herself as a person has made me approve of that decision, a hypothetical idea. So I just thought I'd bring that up. But yeah, that's why I didn't really ask anyone about casting because I didn't know how much. And personally, I don't really care, and we'd have to see how that pans out because there's always new people coming up anyways. But yeah, that's what I would like to see is BioShock as a single movie there. So
I
did
will say I think casting can really improve a movie. I mean, you said Jumanji earlier. This is not an adaptation,
hmm
but part of the reason that is so good is because the cast has so much chemistry.
hmm
And I think Brie Larson would do well with. But I think choosing the right actor or actress, one that brings some presence and popularity, does a lot to bring people into the theaters, but also bring the character alive. So I don't necessarily always have an actor in mind, but when they get it right, I think it really does help. I don't think you can just have anyone play anyone, and I do think having a big name, popular actors are popular for a reason. They typically make good movies.
Yeah. And with Metroid, that's also there's a question there because if we were to do it right, at least in my opinion, she would have to carry pretty much the whole movie. I just want her to be like on an isolated planet being chased by a monster, maybe as like core idea, or solving a mystery, and not even saying too much. Just maybe logging into her computer and doing a voice log here or there. Maybe like one other
Like
side character.
it could be like The Martian. Could be like The Martian
Yeah.
in
Or
terms of
possibly.
Matt Damon on a hostile planet. Yeah.
Yeah. And if they had to force a character, they could either do like maybe she meets one other sentient being lost on that planet, or has a little robot drone thing. Not trying to go like full R2D2, but I'm just saying like she has something to interact with that would make more sense for her to speak because I don't see Samus as the kind of person who would talk to herself. So it'd have to be purposeful, and that I could see those kind of things work in there. And that's another thing with the silent protagonists, like adapting any of these characters that would be silent. The protagonist in Bioshock One is silent, and then in Bioshock Infinite we have a non-silent protagonist. I think they could figure out how to give the main character a personality that suits the situation because it starts with you just a plane crashing in the ocean, and it's just I think there's enough material there to give the character something of a personality that just makes sense of like a little bit no nonsense and just kind of the straight man in a crazy situation is what you'd do for that character, and then the twist would develop over time and it would make sense. So that's for me. So Mark had to leave us, unfortunately. Life required him to step away, which is fine. He's doing good, and we were aware of this. It was just very sudden. In terms of the casting, though, so we're gonna pick up and just kind of speculate on our own, me, Ed, and Paul, about Gears of War, and just have some fun here. I do want to say when he said Batista, like I totally think, especially based off of his performances in Guardians of the Galaxy, not that that would necessarily be analogous to what he'd be doing in Gears of War. I thought when they said Batista as like Marcus Phoenix, I was like, yep, that guy makes sense. Like totally put Batista in there. I would love to see that. And I'm not asking him to be goofy. I want him to do a good portrayal. But yeah, I all for that. So did you guys have any thoughts on Gears of War casting?
I think you nailed it with Batista.
Should we put The Rock in there as well? Should we literally have every big guy? Because they kind of have to be big guys, except for in the future games where they start having some less, they slim them down a little bit, but they're all still very well built soldiers.
Yeah, if I had to pick another person, it would be The Rock. And they both
And
have that kind of, smart guy attitude to them. I think they would. I mean, I'm not that familiar with yours, but my understanding is it's not the most serious game, is it?
It is. It tries to be more serious. It is not like campy like Resident Evil.
Oh
It can
no.
come off campy because it feels like that, but if you actually looked into the way the performances are played in the game, it takes itself seriously, and it's meant to be like they're meant to be like war video games. They're not meant to be like Call of Duty kind of level, not like in Halo. I'd say like Call of Duty and Halo, like Halo and Call of Duty and those tones is the kind of tone that Gears of War goes on. It's just that like kind of the art style with the huge soldiers and some of the ways
The weapons.
it appears like it's supposed to be more campy, but it's actually played a lot more straight than you'd think it is.
So it's kind of unintentional camp.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
well, and to your
Still
point,
camp.
earlier about Batista not being as goofy of a character or whatever, he could definitely be a serious character. As far as like wrestling goes, he was typically a serious character. Like he was just supposed to be. He was usually, the big tough guy, and whenever he was, usually whatever storyline he was involved in, he was a serious tough character. So I think he would definitely be able to nail that if he needed to.
Yeah, I think we'd put Batista, The Rock, to get some female representation there. Gina Carano should be in there. I think she's a former UFC fighter. She was in Deadpool and she's also in The Mandalorian. So she'd make sense for like a soldier war story there. They have other good female characters in the Gears series that I'm just not familiar with, and plenty of female Gears soldiers. So I'd want to see like a little mix there, maybe a 4 or 5. Some not sure what the squad sizes are. I know like the game's 4-player multiplayer, but we could figure that out. Or even maybe there's like separate squads, and you just got kind of a little bit of a mix there with that. So I'd leave that to Mark. But those I wanted to throw those names out there as like big, big strong, muscly people that should be in the Gears of War movie.
That makes sense. Just have all wrestlers.
Okay then. So, any other final thoughts on video game adaptations? We'll start with Paul.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we pretty much covered everything. As far as I know, we were just talking about casting. I don't necessarily look for who's casted. Like to me, I guess it would be more about the video game. Like, oh, this is a movie about a video game I like, so I'll check it out. But I do think they should represent the characters well. Like going back to Mortal Kombat again. Like when I watch that movie, like the guy who plays Liu Kang, like that's Liu Kang to me. The person who plays Sonya, like that's Sonya. Like Johnny Cage is Johnny Cage. All of them. Shang Tsung. The person who plays Raiden is a little bit more goofy, I think, than I would have imagined Raiden. He's like kind of jokes a lot. But other than that, to me, those like when I think of Liu Kang, like I think of that guy in the movie. When I think of Sonya, I think of her character in the movie. Like I think they really nailed it there. So to me, I don't necessarily care who's playing them, but as long as whoever is playing them kind of nails that portrayal, that's it. But yeah, so that's all I've got. I think I touched on everything I wanted to as far as adaptations go. So yeah, I'm good to go from my end.
Fantastic. And Ed, any other thoughts about video game adaptations you wanted to share today?
I thought of an honorable mention that I might like. I last year played Fire Emblem Three Houses, and I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed that. That has quickly become one of my favorite games, and I liked all the characters in that. I liked the style they were doing with the anime style graphics. The voice acting was really good. Like it really was a good experience for me. I think that a Fire Emblem anime has potential. I actually saw that they had one like way
Yeah.
back in like 1997, and apparently they even like I was reading about it just a moment ago. They renamed Marth to Mars, so they didn't even like translate the name of the characters right. So that's a little weird. But I mean, we're not in the age of that kind of anime anymore.
Oh yeah,
So
back then the translations were way worse.
yeah.
Or localizations, we should say.
Yeah, localizations, that's the right word. But a Fire Emblem one has a lot of potential. I don't think it has to have any of the existing characters. Part of the fun of each Fire Emblem game is they introduce a new cast of characters. They
Mm.
are self-contained. But I guess I don't know. It's hard to say if that would even make it like a Fire Emblem movie, because if it's just a new set of characters, like, and there's no tactical gameplay, then like what's to distinguish it as a Fire Emblem movie or anime? But I just like that series.
Yeah, and it is very heavily anime styled, and they do a lot of good lavish cutscenes when they're doing the marketing. I'm not sure how many cutscenes are inside the actual games. I
There
know
were
there's.
not enough in Three Houses. They had a few really nice ones. There was an intro cutscene that was good. There were a few in like transitions between parts of the games,
Mhm.
but I wish there were more, because the ones that were there were very well done. But most of it was just more static conversations. Like, I don't. Have you played any Fire Emblem games?
I haven't. I'm aware that they're like RTS, not RTS. They're turn-based tactical, so I avoid them. But
Yeah.
I've seen a ton of gameplay, so I know what they look like.
Well, a big part of it are these support conversations where,
Yeah.
the more you use different characters together, they get higher levels, and you get to see little conversations between the developer characters.
You mean the dating sim
Um,
aspect? Yeah, I've heard of it.
well, not entirely.
No, it's not
Uh,
always, but that's
less so in Three Houses. I mean, you can still have your waifu in Three Houses, but you're not like pairing up people like in Fates,
yeah, it's the
Awakening.
memeable part of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
But that, I mean, I like all the sport conversations and the little asides. You get to learn a lot about the characters. So I don't know. Maybe that wouldn't work well as it, but if they can make a Castlevania anime work, animated show work, even when like there really isn't that much to there's lore and there's characters, but the animated show itself is just a completely different thing. So I think they could do something with Fire Emblem. I would
Agreed.
probably enjoy it if they did.
I think it would need to be to make it appropriate and to make it work. It would have to be more like a Game of Thrones style story. Like it needs to be that political intrigue, also with some good fight scenes, but in anime form. And I don't think that's just something Nintendo would ever sign off on. Like the games are like where you get that content and what it's just one of those things where I agree with you. It would be great and it could be done, but it's a matter of reality doesn't allow it's a lot of these meta elements that's the reason why the productions get so messed up with creating these is that what they need to do right either isn't going to sell well or they would just refuse to do it even if it would sell well. So that's like the one of our biggest issues there.
I mean, let's
Uh,
be real. There's not going to be a Metroid movie. As much as I would want it, it's not Metroid shows up in the theaters. Probably like 95% of people who see the name Metroid and be like, "What the heck is that?" And they're just not going to be interested in. So as much as I would like adaptations for both of those, I'm not holding my
yeah.
breath.
So we'll have to see because Nintendo probably won't do much. I think there's still rumors going around about whether or not Zelda will get like a Netflix adaptation or some sort of series adaptation. I don't think those are confirmed. For Metroid, I could totally see like what you were saying, like an anime. I could see a Metroid anime, like a little one-shot thing that's maybe a couple episodes, like 6 episodes or something. That's just a little short adventure. Nintendo's also they experimented in the 3DS days. I wanted to bring up that Nintendo did a couple animated shorts for Kid Icarus Uprising with Palutena and Pit. I have to rewatch them, but they did like 5 or 6 of them that were only like a couple minutes long, and they were all like full animated on top of that game being extremely funny. From what I did manage to hear and enjoy when I played it for a brief amount before my hands told cramped up so hard that I was literally couldn't play the game anymore. And
That's how
then
you know it's
also
good.
yeah, and then also Star Fox Zero, they did a little animated CG animated short for that when it was coming out to celebrate. And while that game was a major disappointment, at least for me personally, Nintendo does dabble with independent animations. So there's hope that they might put some of that out there. And who knows if Illumination with the Mario project ends up turning out really good, Nintendo may end up pursuing more projects. Resident Evil has proven to be extremely profitable, enough that Capcom has greenlit Monster Hunter and pursuing tons more Resident Evil projects. And we're just starting to see it kind of ramp up now over time. Pokemon has done phenomenally well over that time. So who knows? And we're probably only going to see more adaptations going forward once things start. Once the industry kind of just figures out how to do things right. And I mean, the Sonic movie is also ended up working out well for the mass audience. Yeah, it's an interesting time to see video games once again really like stretching out. There's a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. There's so many other projects that are coming out that are both deserving and undeserving of adaptations or just why are you bothering? But yeah, we're only going to see more. And there was one more that was confirmed to be happening. Can't remember which one I was thinking of, but there you go. There's so many possibly coming out that I can't even remember all the ones that are rumored or even like just recently were confirmed for early production.
I guess
Yeah,
we'll have
that's
to
pretty
remain
cool.
hopeful. I mean, Nintendo's just getting started. They got Lego now. They're gonna have a theme park. Their Mario movie that's probably actually gonna be good. So
Oh, Minecraft movie. I wonder if there's a Minecraft movie. Like they did the Telltale series, which is as close as you can get to like a TV series without it being TV. So like they they could be open to that. I'm sure Microsoft will try to figure things out, but they may not work with Hollywood to do it anymore. And I had one more that was on the tip of my tongue. Another indie game. Oh, they already had two Angry Birds movies, and like that's a mobile game with no
yeah.
story. Well, like
Sure.
the most bare minimum story. Like these pigs are invading, and the birds got to stop them from stealing their eggs. Like right there. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people who will be listening to this episode and screaming, "You, why aren't you mentioning the Angry Birds movie?" But then also there are hopefully other people who understand why would you talk about the Angry Birds movie.
Well,
So there's even those things like there's mobile games we're probably not even aware of that have gotten weird adaptations, or there might be web series. Like I said, Red versus Blue with Rooster Teeth has been going on forever, and Microsoft is clearly not any interest in shutting them down. So who knows? We there's a lot going on. Um, Hopefully animation tools will get better, so we'll see also good animated series of things and just yeah, the future is I want to say bright, but I think it's more inevitable. The
yeah.
industry's just got to figure it out.
I mean, I mean, this is just a general thought in general, but I think the future is bright for video games overall.
Yeah,
You can really go doom and gloom all the negative trends in the industry, but there's something for everyone, and I think that's just going to be continue to be the case. It's a huge, broad market, and I mean, everybody likes movies. I I think it would be hard to find someone who say they don't like any movies, and I think at some point that will be the case with video games.
Yeah, and I
sure.
think you're going to see more also coming out because of the advances in CGI and animation technology, kind of like what's happened with comic book movies over the last decade. Like,
Hmm.
20 years ago, 25 years ago, when we were growing up, you probably wouldn't have got, well, we didn't, and we wouldn't have been able to get the Avenger type movies because that technology just wasn't there. I mean, we could have got them, but they wouldn't have been what they were. They wouldn't have been these massive blockbuster movies that everybody went to see that made billions upon billions of dollars. And so, really, comic book movies have become mainstream. We might have talked about this before, to where, when we were growing up, comic books and that type of thing was more, you were kind of a nerd, like, oh, you like comic books? Okay. Where now it's like everybody likes it. It's mainstream, it's pop culture, it's huge. I think you might see that upcoming as far as like video game movies as well, because I would imagine that they're a lot more easy to do because of the way animation styles could be done or the way CGI could be done. So yeah, I think you'll see in the future upcoming a lot more adaptations. Whether that's good or bad, I guess we'll see. But yeah,
They
Right.
already
And
use video game technology in movies. They use the
right.
Unreal Engine for The Mandalorian.
yep,
Hmm.
and other movies as well. And to that point, technology is allowing there to be more opportunities for riskier projects to be made. Netflix and other streaming platforms, and the streaming business model is allowing and encouraging content to just be created. Castlevania we got because of that, and so I think that's what we're going to see and hopefully that means people who respect the properties and grew up with them are going to get into positions of power, and going forward we'll just see more and more smart decisions being made because the smart decisions will make money. And I think that's the note right there is smart decisions make money. So respect the games, make good multimedia content, you'll make money.
Yes, I like it.
That's all it's about. Money. That's the only thing that matters.
Well, gents, it's been super fun. Had a great time talking about this, and I'm sure we'll catch up again when these projects come out, and we'll do maybe side reviews or episodes based on that. But yeah, a lot to look forward to. We'll thank Mark for being here, and I'm sure he had a great time being on the episode, and we'll have him back as soon as we can. So I want to thank Ed and Paul also for joining me today. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
My
It was
pleasure.
fun. Good topic.
And thank you, audience, for being with us. We hope you either heard of some new stuff that you might want to check out or got a good laugh out of listening to us talk about these often really cringeworthy pieces of media. But we hope you all do well and take care of yourselves and join us for the next one. Take care until then.